The clipboard shook in Margaret's hands as she screamed about property violations, her backup security team flanking her like an army. But when those three men stepped onto the porch, shoulders back, eyes cold as winter steel, she realized she'd just declared war on the wrong house. Because some neighbors don't just call the police. Some neighbors are the weapon. The morning sun cast long shadows across Willow Creek Drive when Margaret Pemberton adjusted her oversized sunglasses and smoothed her perfectly pressed blazer. At 52, she had cultivated an image of suburban authority that she wielded. Like a weapon, manicured nails that could file a complaint, a voice that could summon managers from 3 counties away, and a sense of entitlement so vast it required its own zip code. Today, she was on a mission. The clipboard in her hands contained what she considered her masterpiece: 17 pages of fabricated violations, forged signatures, and completely fictional HOA bylaws. She'd spent weeks crafting this elaborate deception, complete with a letterhead and legal-sounding jargon that would intimidate any reasonable homeowner into compliance. Her target sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, 1247 Willow Creek Drive. A modest 2-story colonial with a perfectly maintained lawn, tasteful landscaping, and absolutely nothing wrong with it, which was precisely the problem. Margaret had been the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek for nearly a decade, ruling through fear, manipulation, and an endless stream of complaints to actual authorities. But the men who'd moved into 1247 6 months ago had proven frustratingly immune to her tactics. They kept their property immaculate, minded their own business, and worst of all, they ignored her completely. Jake Morrison had been trimming the hedge along his front walkway when he first noticed the woman approaching with her encourage. At 34, the former Navy SEAL had the kind of calm that came from surviving situations where panic meant death. His weathered hands moved with practiced precision as he shaped the greenery, but his peripheral vision tracked the small army marching toward his home. Incoming, he called over his shoulder to the house. Through the front window, Marcus Chen looked up from his laptop where he'd been reviewing blueprints for a veteran housing project. The former explosive ordnance disposal specialist had learned to read body language like others read newspapers, and the approaching group screamed trouble. How many? 1 principal, 3 backup dancers, Jake replied, setting down his hedge. Clippers with deliberate care. Looks like our favorite neighborhood watch captain brought reinforcements. The third voice came from inside the garage, where the sound of a wrench hitting concrete echoed like punctuation. About damn time, growled Tommy Rodriguez. The former Marine had been under the hood of his 1967 Camaro, but trouble had a way of calling him to attention. Margaret stopped at the edge of Jake's property line, her backup team 3 men in ill-fitting security uniforms from Pemberton Protection Services arranging themselves like a small militia. She'd hired them for $50 each, and the promise of authority, knowing that most people would fold at the sight of official-looking badges and stern expressions. Sir, Margaret's voice carried the practiced authority of someone who'd never been told no. I'm Margaret Pemberton, acting president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. We need to discuss your numerous violations of community standards. Jake straightened slowly, his 6'2" frame unfolding with the kind of measured movement that made smart people take a step back. Ma'am, there is no HOA in this neighborhood. We checked before we moved in. That's where you're wrong. Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut glass as she brandished her clipboard like a sword. As of last month, this community has voted to establish an HOA, and your property is in flagrant violation of multiple ordinances. She began reading from her fabricated list with theatrical precision. Violation number 1. Hedge height exceeding the maximum allowable limit of 36 inches. Violation number 2. Unauthorized plant species in the front garden bed. Violation number 3. Improper mailbox positioning relative to the curb line. Jake's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his green eyes. Is that so? Violation number 4, Margaret continued, her voice rising with each invented infraction. Excessive noise during unauthorized hours. We've had complaints about power tools being used before 8 a.m. Violation number 5. Failure to submit landscaping plans for approval. Violation number 6. Ma'am, Jake interrupted, his voice carrying the kind of quiet authority that came from giving orders in combat zones. I'm going to stop you right there. But Margaret was just getting warmed up. She'd rehearsed this performance for weeks, and she wasn't about to let some military burnout interrupt her moment of triumph. Don't you dare interrupt me. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? I have connections throughout this city. I have friends in code enforcement, in the city planning office, and the mayor's administration. The front door opened with a soft click, and Marcus appeared on the porch. His arrival shifted the entire dynamic of the confrontation. Where Jake was tall and lean, Marcus was compact and intense, with the kind of focus that came from disarming bombs under fire. He leaned against the doorframe with deceptive casualness, but his dark eyes cataloged every detail of the scene. Everything. Okay, out here. Jake does a friendly neighborhood discussion, Jake replied, never taking his eyes off Margaret. Seems we've got ourselves an HOA situation. Margaret's confidence swelled at the appearance of a second target. Finally, someone with sense. You need to talk to your roommate about respecting community standards. The Willow Creek HOA has standards. And what HOA? Marcus's question cut through Margaret's momentum like a blade through silk. The one I just established. Margaret's voice climbed an octave as her carefully crafted authority began to crack. Look, I don't have time to explain basic neighborhood politics to a couple of renters who clearly don't understand how property ownership works in a civilized community. The sound of the garage door rolling up punctuated her words like thunder. Tommy Rodriguez emerged from the shadows, and the temperature of the confrontation dropped 10 degrees. Where Jake was diplomatic and Marcus was analytical, Tommy was pure, concentrated intimidation. 6'4", built like a linebacker, with arms covered in tattoos that told stories of places where diplomacy went to die. He wiped his hands on a shop rag with deliberate slowness, his dark eyes moving from Margaret to her 3 hired guns with the kind of assessment that made career criminals reconsider their life choices. Problem. Tommy's voice was gravelly from too many years of shouting over helicopter rotors and artillery fire. Margaret felt a flutter of unease for the first time, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. Not in front of her hired muscle, not after weeks of planning, and certainly not in front of the neighbors who were beginning to peek out from behind curtains and blinds. The problem, she said, lifting her chin with manufactured authority, is that you 3 think you can move into a respectable neighborhood and ignore the rules that keep our community safe and property values high. Well, I have news for you. Days are over. She turned to her security team with theatrical flourish. Gentlemen, I want you to document every violation you can see. Take pictures, measurements, whatever you need for our enforcement action. The 3 hired men looked less confident than they had 10 minutes earlier. But $50 was $50, and Margaret's authority seemed absolute. They began pulling out phones and measuring tapes, moving toward Jake's perfectly maintained property with the awkward determination of people who weren't quite sure what they were looking for, but were being paid to look official while doing it. Ma'am, Jake said, his voice dropping to the kind of quiet that preceded either negotiation or violence. I'm going to ask you one more time to step away from my property, or what? Margaret's laugh was high and sharp, edged with hysteria. You'll call the police. Go ahead. I've been documenting your violations for months. I have witnesses, I have photographs, and I have a legally binding HOA agreement that every homeowner in this neighborhood signed. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder, waving it like a battle flag, including the previous owner of this house. That agreement transferred with the deed, which means you're bound by our community standards whether you like it or not. Marcus straightened from his casual lean, his expression shifting from mild interest to something considerably more dangerous. Can I see that agreement? Absolutely not. This is official HOA business, and you're not a board member. Margaret clutched the folder to her chest like armor. But I'll tell you what I told the last group of troublemakers who thought they could ignore community standards. You have 72 hours to bring your property into compliance, or we'll be filing liens, reporting code violations, and taking whatever legal action is necessary to protect our neighborhood. The 3 men on the porch exchanged a look that would have made a wise person apologize, pack up their fake security team, and retreat to the safety of their own home. But Margaret Pemberton had never been accused of wisdom. And if you think you can intimidate me with your little tough guy routine, she continued, her voice rising to a pie. Margaret's triumphant smile faltered for just a moment at the ice in Jake's voice, but her pride wouldn't let her retreat. Not now, not with an audience of neighbors watching from windows and her hired security team depending on her authority. She'd built her entire identity around being the woman who never backed down, who always got her way, who could bend anyone to her will through sheer force of entitlement. Oh, please, she scoffed, though something in her chest fluttered like a trapped bird. Save the intimidation routine for someone who hasn't heard it all before. You're 3 washed-up military rejects living in a rental house, pretending you're still relevant. I've dealt with your type before. All bark, no bite, and definitely no brains. Tommy's laugh was low and dangerous, the sound a diesel engine makes right before it explodes. Our type? Yes, your type. Margaret's voice climbed higher as she warmed to her theme. Broken soldiers who can't adjust to civilian life? Who think their service record gives them the right to ignore rules and regulations? Well, this isn't Afghanistan or Iraq or whatever sandbox you boys played war in. This is suburban Pennsylvania, and here, I'm the one with the power. Marcus pushed off from the doorframe with fluid grace, his movements precise and economical. Jake, you want to tell her? Or should I? Tell me what? Margaret demanded, but there was a crack in her voice now, a hairline fracture in her confidence. Jake reached into his back pocket and pulled out his wallet with deliberate slowness. From it, he extracted a business card, simple, elegant, with raised lettering that caught the morning light. He held it out to Margaret like he was offering her a poisonous snake. Morrison Security Consulting, he said conversationally. We provide threat assessment and personal protection services for Fortune 500 executives, federal judges, and foreign diplomats. Margaret stared at the card like it might bite her. So what? You're a security guard. Not quite. Marcus had produced his own card, this one slightly thicker, with a holographic seal that screamed federal government. Chen Strategic Solutions. We handle explosive device disposal and security consultation for the Department of Homeland Security. The color began draining from Margaret's face like water from a broken dam. Tommy's card was the simplest of the three, just his name, a phone number, and 5 words that made Margaret's knees go weak. Rodriguez Tactical Training and Consulting. You see, ma'am, Jake continued with the patience of a teacher, explaining multiplication to a particularly slow student, we're not just 3 random military guys living in your neighborhood. We're business partners. This house isn't a rental, it's our headquarters. Margaret's clipboard trembled in her hands. That's impossible. I did research. I checked property records. You checked the name on the deed. Marcus corrected. Morrison Chun Rodriguez LLC. We bought this house specifically because there's no HOA, no restrictive covenants, and no busybody neighbors trying to tell us how to live. Well, you missed one, Tommy added, his grin showing too many teeth. But we're fixing that problem right now. Margaret turned to her security team for support, but found them backing away with the expressions of men who'd just realized they'd been hired to rob Fort Knox with water pistols. The one with the fake badge, Steve. She thought his name was already moving toward his car. Where are you going? Margaret shrieked. I'm paying you to provide security. Lady Steve called over his shoulder, not slowing down. You didn't tell us you were picking a fight with actual operators. I got kids to feed and a parole officer to check in with. Find yourself some other suckers. His 2 companions followed, without a word, leaving Margaret alone on the sidewalk with her fabricated violations and her rapidly crumbling authority. Now then, Jake said, his voice returning to that terrifying calm, let's talk about your little HOA problem. There's no problem, Margaret stammered, clutching her clipboard like a life preserver. I was just, community standards are. We need to maintain property values by fabricating violations and hiring fake security. Marcus stepped down from the porch, and Margaret instinctively backed up. See, here's the thing about guys like Uswer, really good at spotting lies. It's kind of what kept us alive overseas. Tommy joined his partners on the front lawn, completing a loose triangle that had Margaret surrounded without seeming to trap her. So let's start with the basics. There is no Willow Creek HOA, is there, Margaret? Yes, there is. I have the paperwork. You have forgeries, Jake interrupted. Badly done ones. The letterhead is wrong. The legal language is copied from a template you found online, and half the signatures you claim to have are from people who moved away years ago. Margaret's face went from pale to chalk white. How do you? Because we did our homework, Marcus said. The day after your first visit, we ran a complete background check on you, your fake business, and your imaginary HOA. You want to know what we found? Margaret shook her head frantically, but Tommy answered anyway. Margaret Elizabeth Pemberton, age 52, divorced 3 times, currently unemployed. No legitimate business registrations, no professional licenses, and a history of harassing neighbors dating back 15 years. We found complaints filed against you in 4 different states, Jake continued. Restraining orders, small claims judgments, and at least 6 instances where you've been arrested for trespassing while pretending to have authority you don't possess. That's not in Phoenix. You convinced half a neighborhood that you were a city inspector and collected over $3,000 in fake fines before someone actually called the real city office. Marcus said, in Denver, you forged homeowner association documents so convincing that it took a team of lawyers 6 months to unravel the mess you created. Margaret's breathing was coming in short, sharp gasps. Now, you can't. This is harassment. In Tampa, Tommy picked up the thread with obvious relish. You actually managed to get yourself elected to a real HOA board, then embezzled $12,000 in community funds to pay for your own home improvements. You served 18 months in minimum security for that one. So you see, Jake said with gentle menace, we know exactly who we're dealing with. The question is, do you know who you're dealing with now? Margaret looked around desperately, but the neighbors who'd been watching from their windows had either retreated inside or were openly enjoying the show. Mrs. Patterson from across the street was recording with her phone, and old Mr. Kowalski was sitting on his porch with a bowl of popcorn like he was at the movies. I could call the police. Margaret whispered. Please do, Marcus said cheerfully. I'd love to explain to them how you've been impersonating an HOA official, trespassing on private property, and attempting to extort money through fraudulent violations. Also, Tommy added, turns out the Pemberton Protection Services business cards you printed at FedEx are a violation of Pennsylvania law. Impersonating licensed security personnel is a felony. Margaret's clipboard finally slipped from her nerveless fingers, scattering her fake violations across Jake's perfectly manicured lawn. I was just, The neighborhood needs property. VALUES. The neighborhood needs protection from predators like you, Jake said flatly. People who use fear and fake authority to control and manipulate their neighbors. But here's the really interesting part, Marcus continued. We didn't just research you, Margaret. We researched your victims. 15 families driven out of their homes by your harassment, 3 small businesses forced to close because of your fake complaints, an elderly veteran who had a heart attack after you served him with fabricated legal documents. Margaret's legs gave out, and she sat down, hard on the sidewalk. I never meant, ... I was just trying to maintain standards. You were trying to feel powerful, Tommy said without sympathy. You were trying to control people because it made you feel important, but you picked the wrong targets this time. Jake crouched down until he was eye level with the broken woman. On his sidewalk, here's what's going to happen. Margaret, you're going to go home, pack your bags, and leave this neighborhood. Today, I can single quotes T. This is my home. This is a house you're renting under a fake lease agreement, Marcus corrected. We checked with the actual owner this morning. Turns out he's been trying to evict you for non-payment for 3 months. But you've been hiding behind fraudulent legal documents. Mr. Harrison is expecting our call, Tommy added. He's very interested to learn about your little side business in fake HOA violations, especially since you've been telling other tenants that you're the property manager and collecting fees for services you don't provide. Margaret looked up at the 3 men standing over her, and for the first time in her adult life, she was face to face with people who couldn't be intimidated, couldn't be manipulated, and couldn't be fooled. What do you want from me? She whispered. Jake's smile was cold as January wind. Justice, Margaret, for everyone you've hurt, everyone you've driven away, everyone whose life you've made miserable because you could. He stood up and brushed imaginary dirt from his hands. You have until sunset to be gone. If you're not, we'll be making some phone calls to friends of ours in various law enforcement agencies. They're very interested in people who impersonate officials and run con games on honest citizens. Margaret struggled to Margaret's hands shook as she fumbled with her car keys, her mind reeling from the complete destruction of everything she'd built her identity around. But as she reached her dented Honda Civic, something inside her snapped back into place, not sanity, but the desperate fury of a cornered predator. She spun around, her face twisted with rage and humiliation. You think you're so smart. You think you've won. Her voice cracked like breaking glass. I've been running cons since before you boys learned to tie your combat boots. This isn't my first rodeo, and it sure as hell won't be my last. Jake, Marcus, and Tommy exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They'd seen this before at the moment when a defeated enemy chose escalation over surrender. Margaret, Jake said with weary patience, walk away while you still can. Walk away. Margaret's laugh was high and hysterical. From 3 military washouts who think they're hot shit because they can look up public records. You have no idea what you're dealing with. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers. See, boys, while you were playing detective, I was making phone calls. Real phone calls, to real people with real authority. Marcus stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. What did you do, Margaret? I did what any concerned citizen would do when confronted with suspicious activity in their neighborhood. Margaret's smile was venomous as she held up her phone. I called in reports about potential terrorist activity at 1247 Willow Creek Drive. The blood drained from Tommy's face. You didn't. Oh, but I did. Margaret's triumph was manic now, feeding on their sudden tension. 3 Middle Eastern Menzari Marcus. Close enough for government, we're operating some kind of tactical training facility in a residential neighborhood. Explosives, equipment in the garage, weapons training in the backyard, suspicious meetings, at all hours. Jake's voice was deadly quiet. You called who? Exactly. FBI? ATF? Homeland Security? Local police? Even the terrorism hotline. Margaret counted them off on her fingers like she was listing Christmas presents. I've been documenting your suspicious activities for weeks. Photos of your equipment, deliveries, recordings of loud noises from your garage, witness statements from concerned neighbors. What witnesses? Marcus demanded. The ones I paid $50 each to sign statements, just like I paid my security team today. Margaret's grin was pure malice. Turns out people will say just about anything if you put it in official-looking language and wave a few bills around. Tommy took a step forward, his massive frame radiating controlled violence. Lady, you have no idea what you just did. I know exactly what I did. Margaret shot back. I called in 3 suspicious foreign nationals who've been running some kind of paramilitary operation in our neighborhood. And you know what? After 9/11s, after Boston, after every terrorist attack that's happened on American soil, the authorities don't take chances with tips like that. The sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, still faint but growing stronger. They're coming for you, Margaret whispered with sick satisfaction. Federal agents, SWAT teams, the whole 9 yards. And when they're done tearing your little operation apart, when they've arrested you for whatever laws you've broken, when your names are splashed across every news station as suspected terrorists, then we'll see who has the real power in this neighborhood. Jake's phone buzzed, then Marcus's, then Tommy's, all at the same time. Incoming, Jake said grimly, checking his messages. Multiple agencies, full tactical response, authorized. ETA 12 minutes, Marcus added, his training taking over despite the surreal situation. FBI's running point, ATF and DHS in support. Tommy's expression was murderous as he stared at Margaret. You called in a terrorist threat on 3 decorated veterans. Do you have any idea what that's going to cost? Taxpayers. What resources you've just wasted. What lives you might have put in danger by pulling units away from real threats. I don't care, Margaret snarled. You humiliated me. You destroyed my authority. You tried to run me out of my own neighborhood. Well, congratulations, you Jess. Learn what happens when you mess with someone who has nothing left to lose. The sirens were getting louder now, multiple vehicles approaching from different directions. Jake looked at his partners with grim resignation. Positions? Gentlemen, this is about to get very complicated. Jake, Marcus said quietly, we've got about 10 minutes before this place becomes a federal circus. What's the play? We do this right, Jake replied. By the book, full cooperation, and we pray that cooler heads prevail once they realize what actually happened here. Tommy was already moving toward the house. I'll secure our gear, make sure everything's locked down tight. Last thing we need is some trigger-happy Fed finding loose ammunition and deciding we're building bombs. As Tommy disappeared inside, Margaret's phone rang. She answered it with shaking hands, her voice instantly transforming into that of a concerned citizen. Hello, yes, this is Margaret Pemberton, the woman who called in the report. Yes, there, still here? No. They haven't made any threatening moves yet, but I can see them coordinating something. It looks like they're preparing for your arrival. Jake snatched the phone from her hand with lightning speed. This is Jake Morrison. I'm a former Navy SEAL, and this woman has just filed false reports against 3 veterans who run a legitimate security consulting business. The voice on the other end was crisp and professional. Sir, I need you to remain calm and stay where you are. Federal agents are en route to your location. Any attempt to flee or resist will be met with appropriate force. I'm not going anywhere, Jake said firmly, but I need you to understand that you're responding to fraudulent reports filed by someone with a documented history of harassment and impersonation of officials. Sir, that will be determined during our investigation. For now, I need you to put the phone down and step away from any weapons or equipment. Jake handed the phone back to Margaret, who immediately resumed her performance as a terrified neighbor under threat from dangerous militants. Marcus emerged from the house with a thick folder in his hands. Service records, business licenses, federal security clearances, and contact information for every commanding officer and federal agent we've ever worked with, he announced. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Good thinking, Jake approved. What about our current contracts? Already made the calls, Marcus replied. Our clients are being notified that we may be temporarily unavailable due to a federal investigation. Senator Williams' security team is not happy, but they understand. Margaret's eyes widened at the mention of a senator. You're lying, you're just trying to sound important. Senator Patricia Williams' Judiciary Committee? Marcus said without looking at her. We've been handling her personal security for 8 months. She's going to be very interested to learn that her protection detail has been targeted by false terrorism reports. The first vehicles were now visible at the end of the street, black SUVs, with tinted windows and emergency lights flashing. Behind them came armored trucks and what looked like half the police force of 3 counties. Jesus, Tommy muttered, emerging from the house with his hands visibly empty. They're treating this like a full-scale raid. Because that's exactly what it is, Jake said grimly. Margaret just turned our quiet neighborhood into a federal crime scene. The lead SUV screeched to a halt 50 yards away, and federal agents, in full tactical gear, began pouring out like an invasion force. Assault rifles, body armor, communications, equipment, the full counter-terrorism response. Federal agents? The voice boomed through a megaphone. Everyone on the ground. Now, Jake, Marcus, and Tommy immediately dropped to their knees with their hands visible, their military training taking over. They knew the drill: comply first, sort out the details later. Margaret, however, remained standing, basking in her moment of ultimate triumph. That's right, she shouted to the agents. Those are the 3 I told you about, the ones running the terrorist training camp. A federal agent approached her with practiced caution, his rifle trained on the 3 men kneeling on the lawn. Ma'am, you need to move back to a safe distance while we secure the scene. But I'm the one who called you, Margaret protested. I'm the witness. I can tell you everything about their operation. Ma'am, step back now, the agent ordered, his patience clearly wearing thin. As Margaret reluctantly moved toward the street, more agents swarmed the property. Bomb disposal units, forensics teams, and what looked like enough firepower to level a city block, all because one bitter woman had decided to weaponize the federal government against 3 veterans who'd had the audacity to stand up to her. This is Agent Sarah Chen, FBI Counterterrorism Division, announced a woman in tactical gear as she approached the kneeling men. Which one of you is Jake Morrison? That would be me, ma'am, Jake replied without moving. You're going to stand up slowly, keep your hands visible, and walk toward me. Any sudden movements and my team will respond accordingly. As Jake carefully rose to his feet, Agent Chun's expression changed subtly. There was something in his posture, his bearing, his absolute calm in the face of federal agents with assault rifles that spoke of genuine training and discipline. Military? She asked quietly. Navy SEAL, ma'am. 12 years active duty, honorable discharge. Agent Chenzrati,